Welcome back to another episode of the Breakneck Podcast. You have Ian to
Hey,
my
Matt.
left or right. We are two founders, entrepreneurs, product people who are just dealing with a very fast-changing world where things that used to be impossible are now possible, and things that used to make money now don't. And so you need to be really thoughtful. So we do a podcast essentially for us to stay on top, but we figure why not record it and put a little bit more effort into it. But we try to do it frequently. And the topic this week is a report called Canaries in the Coal Mine: 6 Facts About Recent Employment Effects of Artificial Intelligence. But what it says is that for industries that are most exposed to AI, overall employment has held pretty firm, but the rate at which they hire young people has gone down significantly. So if you're 22 to 25 and you're trying to get your first job out of college in certain fields like computer science, where, the kind of work that a 22-year-old would do when they got out of school has now been essentially automated, they're having much less success. And that has a lot of troubling, effects. If we continue for 5 more years, then essentially you'd have a whole generation of software developers with much lower wages and much lower employment. So that's what we're going to dig through today. I'm most excited to critique their assumptions, but overall, it's a Stanford paper. Seems pretty well pedigreed, but it's also a kind of like an economics paper where, as a former physicist, I'm a little bit skeptical about some of their, when they play the game. I'm like, well, other things could be involved. It's like, well, isn't it your job to not just produce a very strong headline and then literally not call it like something anodyne, like, possible correlations between labor market and blah, blah, blah. No, canaries in the coal
The
mine.
coal mine. I love it. This is why I'm here, Matt. This is what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear your critique of their scholarship.
Well, so love to hear your thoughts on it. But essentially what they did is they looked at industries, and there's a pretty good literature now correlating which industries have the most AI. And they looked at certain things like scores, like publicly available scores for certain types of work. For instance, how well can an AI finish certain types of programming tasks? And there's something called the software engineer bench. And, between 2023, it went from something like 4% of coding problems solved to 71%. So you would expect over that time period to have pretty remarkable decrease in demand for software engineering to first order. And when I say to first order, that's like an insult, because of course, industries are very good at redistributing resources. And even if one type of thing can get finished, but there's a case to be made for it, and the data is not inconsistent with it. However, it's far from conclusive that people are not hiring young people because of AI. Especially AI has had a huge effect lately. And actually, there's been more of a pickup in the last few months of hiring. And I can see this, privately, in how much software engineering services are being procured. Like that's picked up from in the private markets, even as the AI has gotten much better. So it's kind of like, okay, where's the actual correlation? But it's worth talking about. We look at these papers. This is not going to be a foundation of economics for 10 years, but it's an interesting talking point, and it's a good time to discuss the structure of the industry.
Yeah, the question that it's peeling the very first layer of the onion back on is AI having an impact on unemployment? But it's the most rigorous one that I've seen, the most plausible one, I suppose, and it is based on ADP employment data. And so they've taken that as kind of one of the inputs. They've taken kind of a somewhat holistic perspective, and they've said, okay, what jobs are more likely or less likely to be exposed / impacted by AI, and then they've kind of mapped that to the employment rate and the shift in sort of jobs being created or not. And it's got some decent numbers in there as well. And just to put it into a little bit of context, unemployment rate in the US as of August is 4.3%. We've just been through a pretty good period of low unemployment, around 4%, which is, historically very low. To contrast that to the EU, unemployment rate as of today, I believe, is 5.9%, down from much, much higher, close to 10% in the last 10 years, I think. So
Mhm, mhm.
US is in a good position, right? If you go onto LinkedIn or whatever and you say, what's unemployment like? People are freaking out, right? It's really bad. It's really bad. So the data doesn't necessarily suggest that, although it is ticking up. So
Yeah, I
that's
think there, we need to differentiate two things, which is overall employment from what I would call kind of like white collar professional employment. And this paper, even if, stock clerks and people doing kind of more manual type of no impact in terms of different ages getting different employment levels. So this was really something localized to what you would call, like marketing professionals and people who are more impacted by AI. But like, if you think about what AI is and generative AI in particular, um, yeah, it's going to do white collar work. We don't have robots in the streets driving trucks yet, or we might get there. And that would be another interesting paper. But AI has really impacted white collar work. But that creates a terrible confounder, which is the end of the zero interest rate policy, ZIRP. I would put that sometime in the summer of 2022 is when that really ended. And what we saw is the stock market reached a peak in 2021, around October, November, and then started coming down. And then if you go back and rewind, if we had been doing breakneck at that point, like the topic would have been everybody started doing layoffs. Google did layoffs, Facebook did layoffs, whatever. If you're doing layoffs, of course, you're not going to go and hire, especially if you're Google. Like you've made 20 years of we're not going to lay people off. We're the safest place. It's worth spending a year applying to us because once you get the job, it's like a sinecure for life. And they started doing layoffs. So of course you can't hire 10,000 or 20,000 junior engineers during a year when you're laying off 40 or 50,000 of your senior employees. You got to space those out for optics. And so Google laid off a bunch of people. Facebook, it was the Mark Zuckerberg. Remember, the Facebook stock was in the tank early 2022. It's down at like 90. And now it's at 500, 600. And Mark Zuckerberg said, hey, I'm going to stop hiring for the metaverse. I'm going to stop all that. So all of that is happening in 2022. Everybody's doing layoffs. Everybody's cutting back on services. Everybody's cutting back, right? So it's like we had ZIRP where you could essentially use 20, 30 years of cash flow in the future to fund your growth right now. And then interest rates went up in 2022. The end of the zero interest rate policy and then the COVID policy on top of it. And so there was a huge pullback, and that affected primarily the companies that had benefited most over the previous 12, 13 years, which was technology companies and white collar professionals and services who had been basically had the huge wage gains, huge employment gains. And so you have a shock of like a very quick end over about 6 months. And I remember in January 2022 is just VCs started like closing down shop. And by the end of the summer, it was everybody cutting back, everybody pulling back, everybody saying it's the end, wait till 2026. And that had nothing to do with AI. The fact that the US economy had far more demand than the industry was capable. So we had inflation increase, remember, in 2021, 2022. So they increased the interest rates, stock market crashed, everybody stopped hiring. That's what happened. And the thing about this paper is they don't talk about that. They don't provide counterfactuals of like, well, was it, you know, Google employs like 200,000 software engineers. So when Google stops hiring, yeah, it's going to impact like certain people. Now, is that AI? I mean, they put like the date of GPT-4, 3 coming out, and they're like, okay, that's the start. And it's like, yeah, there was also when everybody was not hiring too. It's like those two
Mm.
things happened at the same time. You can't just do time series analysis and then say, well, it must have been AI.
Well, let's tease it apart a little bit. Let's present some of their claims here, and I think the biggest one uh, is that in AI exposed jobs, specifically software engineers, in the cohort of 22 to 25-year-olds, they've seen a 22% decline in jobs, in hiring for software engineers. So that's the big ones. We've seen that if you look at the data for Ivy League software engineering graduates, the numbers are declining fairly, or have declined fairly rapidly. Now, let's talk about cause, and let's talk about what's going to happen in the future. So you're contending, Matt, I think that there's two factors potentially in here. One is AI, and two is the end of ZERP. They did do? There was some serious maths in there, Matt. I'm surprised you didn't go through it, but there was some pretty serious maths in there. There was summation and there was some integration in there as well, I think.
They are
And
using
then
Greek symbols.
there was
They
Greek
have
symbols everywhere.
alphas with multiple subscripts and things like that. Look,
There was even a beta in there somewhere.
there
So
is a beta. There's
yeah.
several betas.
So
Yeah,
you
they
can either
signalize all
decode the
that.
maths for
Gamma, they
us
get a gamma.
or debunk it.
Yeah, they really no, it's look, as a physicist, it's kind of like, okay, you didn't prove anything. It's suggestive. It's
Okay.
suggestive. This whole paper could have been, look at this graph. What do you think? They didn't prove to me, or really like, you have this enormous confounding effect, which is AI affects certain types of industries. Those also happen to be things that are very susceptible to interest rate policy, like hiring a bunch of very high-end professionals ahead of time. So maybe in 5 or 6 years, you have the best engineers, is something that you only do when you have a ton of free cash and you're like, well, we're investing this for the future, right? In the same way that you see buildings stop getting built when interest rate, well, you might make cash flow in this in 10 years, but you're going to stop until the interest rates come down. Versus, hey, somebody's going to pay me today to fix their wall or do something. Like, it's just like the time horizon for these investments in high-end professionals also happens to be highly correlated with the type of things that AI is good at. AI is not good at picking up trash. AI is good at writing emails. So it's like there's this huge confounder. And it's just as easy to tell this story with like ZERP ended and people stopped hiring.
Yeah, big tech isn't the only hirer of young software engineers.
But you only you're trying to come back to a 13%, right? And everybody got impacted by interest rates. Everybody's stock, dropped, right? So it's like you want to have like a causal, what was the mechanical process of some kind of input shock turning into a change in employment rates for young people? I don't know. Think back to 2023, 2022. Okay, ChatGPT came out. Like, oh, I'm going to immediately start firing. That's going to start showing up in employment data. No, there's no mechanism. No CFO saying like, oh my God, look at the possibilities with AI. We better stop hiring. No. Well, what had happened is 6 months earlier, interest rates started going up. And then they said, we better pull on the brakes because we're going to need a lot of cash flow or we're going to get annihilated. And many companies were annihilated. I just cannot see any type of causal link between some development, especially early stage development, where generative AI has come a long way in the last 3 years. But where it was in 2022 was just not enough to replace enterprise workflows in any kind of event. And even if it was, the adoption isn't there. And even if it was, the mechanism of stopping hiring in those companies is so disconnected from individual productivity. It would take a year or two to get there. I don't know. It's not compelling to me.
So, okay, let's come back to it, but I want to take a couple of things off the table just to paint the bigger picture. So they said a couple of things in here. You talked about sort of, let's say, digital versus non-digital work. So the non-digital work has zero impact. That, in fact, particularly in the younger age groups, that's where most of the growth is, healthcare and a couple of other places. If you're between 22 and 25 and you want a job, healthcare, and there's a bunch of places where there's a lot of job growth. If you look across the other age cohorts, job growth is consistent throughout. It's higher. Let me take that back. It's healthy throughout. So if you look across the age groups, the matrix of kind of age cohorts and then types of work, digital versus non-digital, there's one square that's in trouble, and that square is digital work for younger workers, particularly if you're in the software or customer support side. So that's a uh, let's say an automated type potential where your job could be automated. And then there's other roles, let's say marketing, for example, where it could be augmented by AI, and that was impacted as well. So a big matrix is one square where you're in a spot of bother. So let's kind of come back to that square. And you're saying that you've got the ZERP shock, and then let's call it the AI shock. Causation versus correlation. Yes, I get the argument, but are you saying that your intuition says that the decline in hiring of software engineers in that younger group is not impacted by AI, or has little to no impact as a result of AI?
People did a lot of cost cutting in 2022, and nobody wants to say, "We're not gonna make money unless we fire people." That's a bad market signal. And at the time, people said, "AI is coming, AI is coming." Nobody was using AI in nearly the way. And it's you stop hiring young people, like it's just a shock, not pull back or slow down, but just a shock. We're zero headcount increase. Facebook had zero headcount, no new headcount, right? So it's like that's going to impact predominantly young people, right? If you're not already in the business, you're going to get there's going to be and there's going to be some ups and some downs for every cohort, but like a stop new hires is going to predominantly impact young people.
Why? Sorry, why are you saying that? Walk me through that.
Some people, I mean, like a whole bunch of people already have jobs and roles and things like that. And if you have a zero headcount, the easiest place is just don't hire any new people, right? Like that's if you just stop like this big funnel of hiring 10, 20,000 people out of college every year, you stop that. They still need to hire a director role if a director leaves, right? Like that's
Surely
going to
you'd
get
be more
filled.
inclined if you're cost cutting, you'd be more inclined to hire younger people.
It wasn't cost cutting. It was a shock. It was no new people, no additional headcount, right? Like this is companies that are growing 5 or 6% in headcount every year saying, okay, we're not going to do that in a year. Now, if somebody quits, you slot them right back in, but like you're not going to be able to grow your team. It means it's pretty easy to imagine someone who's out of the industry stops growing in size, who is going to be impacted? And if you only have one headcount, you're not going to hire some young person. You're going to hire somebody with some experience. Again, like so much like of the thinking that behind this it fills is just like, oh, these businesses are entirely rational. It's not how businesses work. You get a certain number of headcount, you get a certain salary bands, and you can swap people out. If somebody leaves one firm, they can get
Yeah,
swapped
but
back.
the pressure is normally downwards on I know you want a director, but we can only get you a manager. I know you want a manager, but I only get you a lead. I know you want a lead. How about a graduate?
Yeah, and I've not seen in those big companies like, well, I could save $30,000 and perhaps get it done with a younger person. You just hire the person you're allowed to hire and you hire the most senior person possible. Like this is a big problem in businesses. I'm just saying like there isn't some like especially over shorter time periods. Like you might have the CFO come in and say, "Hey, we're going to redirect." And honestly, they probably wouldn't do that via pushing for younger people. They would probably, if they wanted to save costs, do offshoring. That's the CFO level thinking. Managers don't think like CFOs. They don't think about in terms of profit maximization. They generally try to hire the most senior person possible that they're allowed to hire because it makes their job easier and less work for them.
So are you saying you don't instinctively, this study aside, you don't think that AI is having an impact on the hiring of younger software?
No, that's not
No.
what I'm saying. I think it probably is.
Ah, okay.
I'm saying this data's crap.
Okay.
It's
All
just
right. Well, let's talk a little bit. I mean, I can
here's
see that, but
here's the metric that I think is much more interesting this week. The Trump administration fired the head of BLS because they got bad jobs data last month, and so he just fired the messenger. Like, there's no reason to believe the numbers were fake at all, but it was bad numbers, and so he fired him just to show he was taking action. And the whole message for the last month was the numbers were fake. Anyway, he has his head of BLS in now, and numbers are even worse this month. And they revised down the number of jobs that have been gained over the last 6 to 8 months since he's taken office by 900,000, almost a million. But they did not revise down the productivity growth, the kind of aggregate productivity. And so there is a very strong reason to believe we have seen a nationwide stop in hiring, right? So actually not just firm specific or industry specific, but overall, like you're seeing aggregate 1 million jobs lost, and you've the interest rate, the there was already kind of bad numbers already, but now another 1 million revised out when they went and shored up the various methods of estimation, but the productivity hasn't come down, and that's what I would expect to see with some kind of actual AI shock, which you wouldn't expect in 2022. By the way, you would expect it. Hey, we've had years to adopt it. It's starting to percolate its way down through firms. And that's a much more troubling to first order, which again, insult. To first order, it's much more troubling that we're seeing jobs being lost while the economy keeps cranking. Like firms are more profitable, productivity is going up, people are coming out of the economy. And so what you should see now is that the Fed is probably looking at these very soft hiring numbers. Productivity is still going up, which means that the availability of goods is not pulling back. And so you should start to, if you put those two things together, you should see interest rates coming down in the next few months, which would then companies will have more future cash flows to borrow against because of the longer kind of duration you're allowed to borrow against when interest rates come down. And they'll pull those cash flows forward, hire some people, and you'll see, pretty good job expansion. But that's a much more powerful story, and it isn't kind of confounded in the same way that this data is.
Yep, I get you. It's quite an optimistic view, actually, Matt.
I thought I was
Let
pure cynicism in this podcast episode so far, but
you well, that's yeah, no, kudos where it's been earned. I want to delve back into kind of the mechanics of what's going on at the cohort of these 22 to 25-year-old software engineers. The confounding aspect of it aside, I believe that AI, and particularly the software tools that have become available in the last while, have had an impact in terms of, if you're going to hire folks, let's hire more senior folks. I also think that's because the kids that are coming out of college were educated on a curriculum that was designed who knows how long ago, years ago. So despite the fact that these kids, I'm going to call them kids because they're a lot younger than me, um, these kids are probably best positioned to master this technology. I actually think, and perhaps I hope, that this is a little bit of a blip, because these guys just got spat out of the production line and they're like, here we are, here's our degrees, and here's what we've all been taught. And the industry is like, well, that's not what I need right now. I
Mhm.
need experience plus somebody who's really mastered AI tools. And so I think even in the next, I would imagine your 2026 graduates, whether they've learned it in school or learned it by themselves, are going to come out much better tooled to be AI mastered graduates and software engineers. So my hunch says, as well as with Jevons paradox, I think we're just going to see more and more demand. And I hope and I think, particularly for the software engineers, this is going to be a blip. Your thoughts?
Ironically, but this paper is coming out in 2025 August. Ironically, I think the reason this paper is getting so much view is not the quality of the scholarship, the headline, "Canary in the Coal Mine," which is like, isn't this the early signs? More and more of those signs are showing up in 2025. But it's way too early, and the magnitude and the timing of things make much more sense from interest rates. I think what we're going to see is interest rates coming down, possibly because of AI. And that ironically, now we're talking about second order effects, which as a physicist, good. First order, bad. Second order, thoughtful. The second order effect of AI is you have this productivity that keeps growing. So you should start seeing softness in prices, right? Because we keep building more stuff, but we're hiring fewer people. Profits are very high. So they're going to be starting to invest more and fight. And so you probably should see interest rates come down because of AI. The economy is staying strong even though interest rates are coming down. And so you'll get kind of like finally get the soft landing that we would have had earlier without the tariffs. And which means low interest rates, but a strong economy. And that'll lead to very fast hiring. And all these 25-year-olds who had been, taking, waiter jobs or whatever can finally use their degree. But I just, that's how I would imagine the economy works. I'm not an economist, but this isn't compelling to me, but
Well, maybe it's time to wrap up the Breakneck Politics and Economics podcast this week. With
And I just want
that,
everyone to know my politics are I would really like lower interest rates while still having low unemployment. That would be great. That's if one political party ever came out for that and that was the whole package, they would get me to vote for them. No one else would.
there you go.
But that would get my vote.
There you go. So what crossed your desk this week of an AI nature that
Oh,
was
the
intriguing or
not even this
exciting?
week, this morning, Oracle just popped 40% this morning, which I was going through and doing the numbers while we were chatting before we started. I think increased Larry Ellison. The newspaper, a lot of the newspapers that talked about Larry Ellison just got a lot richer because he owns like 40% of Oracle. They were saying 70 billion, excuse me, then 80 billion. I think he's at like 108 billion at the
Bump
most recent
today.
today. So he's now the I was checking like the news articles that are coming out in the last 20 minutes before we started the call, and it was like he's now the richest guy on earth. So that was really a story not about earnings from Oracle, but the future demand for data centers. And I think Larry Ellison has been extremely adept at staying in the right place in the market with around the AI story. And I have no idea how Oracle made that much. I need to go back and look, but that was a big thing was the AI data center, and there's going to be a lot of demand for Oracle AI databases, I guess.
Crazy numbers. The thing that came across my desk was the same as last week, but so last week I mentioned the advancement in image models is ridiculous. It's a different shape than the traditional LLMs, a much longer tail. The rate at which stuff is coming out is ridiculous. And the other thing that is fairly apparent to me is that on the outside, if you're looking sort of image and visuals generation, as consumers, like, oh my God, look at that gorgeous image that just got created when I prompted it this way. When you're using imagery commercially to do various things, the requirements around fidelity and a bunch of different color quality, there's a bunch of different things that are really complex to solve. The pieces of the puzzle are coming together. So we're going to see some really interesting stuff, I think, in the next
I would love to
6
have
months.
you go look at Nano Banana, which is the newest image suite
Yeah.
by Google.
I mean, we've used it. We are using it. It's good, but it's not the mind-blowing stuff.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
let's do an episode on this. We need to
Yeah,
get
we
into
might have
this.
to. We might have
All
to.
right.
All right, well, Matt, that was a good one. Thank you as always. I guess we'll wrap it there.
All right. See you next time.